Right now, somewhere in the world, a crow is watching you. Not in a vague, instinctive way, not the way a fly reacts to movement, or the way a fish turns toward shadow. This crow has seen your face before. It remembers it. And if you once scared it, or fed it, or simply walked past it 100 times on your way to work, that bird has filed your face away somewhere in its mind, attached to a feeling, attached to a memory, attached to something that functions, at least, like a judgment about who you are. The question that should stop you cold isn't whether that's impressive. The question is, what does it mean that an animal looked at your face and decided something about you? That's the thread we're pulling today. And it doesn't end somewhere comfortable. The idea that animals simply react to us, that we're just large moving objects in their environment, triggering instinct, and nothing more, has been falling apart for decades under the weight of actual science. Not philosophy, not sentiment, controlled experiments, peer-reviewed studies, animals doing things in laboratory conditions that they simply shouldn't be able to do if they were only running on reflex. And one of the most quietly astonishing findings to emerge from that research is this. Many animals don't just perceive humans. They recognize specific humans, individual faces, individual histories, and they carry that recognition forward in time. Let's start with the crows, because the research here is some of the most striking on record. In 2008, John Marsloff and his team at the University of Washington conducted a now famous experiment. Researchers wore rubber masks, the face of a threatening person, while they trapped and banded wild crows on campus. Then they walked the same campus routes wearing those masks days, weeks, and eventually years later. The crows didn't just remember the masks. They scolded the threatening faces from greater distances over time. They recruited other crows to mob the threatening person. And here's the part that shifts something in your chest. Crows that had never been trapped, that had simply learned from watching others, also began to react to the threatening mask. The memory had spread through the population. These birds were teaching each other who you are. If you find yourself wanting to understand more about the interior lives of animals, what they feel, what they remember, who they think we are, this channel is entirely devoted to that question. Every video here is about the emotional and cognitive life of animals and the bond they form with us. Consider subscribing, because this particular rabbit hole goes very deep. Now, the crow research raises an immediate and uncomfortable question. Recognizing a face is one thing, but recognizing a face and attaching an emotional valence to it, danger, safety, trust, threat, that's something else. That requires memory with feeling. That requires something more than a lookup table. And this is where the science starts to press against the edges of what we thought animals could do. Fish were supposed to be simple. And then researchers published a study in 2016 inches. The journal Scientific Reports, showing that archerfish, small tropical fish known for spitting water at insects, could distinguish between human faces with remarkable accuracy, up to 81% correct in some trials, even when the images were controlled to remove obvious cues like hair and skin tone. These are animals with a brain the size of a pea, with no neocortex, the brain structure long believed to be essential for complex recognition. Scientists had to revise their assumptions about what kind of brain you need to tell one person from another. But here's where it gets strange. If fish can do this, and crows can do this, the question isn't really which animals can recognize humans. The question becomes, why would so many animals, across completely different branches of the evolutionary tree, develop this ability at all? What pressure shaped it? And the answer, when you sit with it, is that the ability to recognize specific individual humans has been one of the most survival-relevant skills an animal living near people could possibly develop. We are not neutral features of their environment. We are consequential. We feed them, or we hunt them. We protect territories, or we destroy them. We are, to many animals, among the most important variables in their world. And they evolved to track us accordingly. This reframes the entire relationship. You aren't just observing these animals. They are observing you, categorizing you, building something like a dossier. Primates take this further, in ways that begin to feel genuinely intimate. Franz de Waal, the primatologist whose decades of work at the Yerkes National Primate Research Center transformed how scientists think about animal emotion, documented repeatedly that chimpanzees not only recognize individual humans, but form differentiated relationships with them. Some humans trusted, some feared, some actively sought out for play or comfort. The chimp Washoe, famous for being the first non-human to acquire American Sign Language in a study that began in 1966, demonstrated something that still echoes. When researcher Roger Fouts returned after a long absence, Washoe didn't just recognize him. She signed his name. She had held his identity in her mind across time and distance and retrieved it the moment he reappeared. What does it take to hold someone's face in your memory, not just for days, but for years? What does it mean that an animal does that and feels something when the face returns? This is the question we'd love to hear your answer to. Have you ever had an animal recognize you after a long absence? A dog, a horse, a bird, a fish? Tell us in the comments what that moment felt like from your side, because there's a second side to that moment, and science has been quietly trying to describe it. The mechanisms behind long-term face recognition in animals are still being mapped, but what researchers have uncovered already is striking. In horses, a 2015 study published in Current Biology by researchers at the University of Sussex showed that horses could look at a photograph of a human face they had met before and match it to the person standing in front of them, bridging photograph and reality in a way that required abstract representation. And their responses weren't neutral. When they saw an angry face in the photograph before meeting the person in real life, they looked at that person with their left eye, the eye connected to the right hemisphere, the hemisphere associated in many vertebrates with processing threatening stimuli. The horse had been primed by the image. It arrived at the encounter already feeling something. This is the part where the iceberg metaphor becomes almost irresistible. What you can see, the behavioral response, the recognition, the reaction, is the surface. Below it is an internal world that science is only beginning to illuminate, and the more instruments researchers bring to it, the larger it appears. The Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, signed in 2012 by a prominent group of neuroscientists including Stephen Hawking as a witness, stated formally that non-human animals possess the neurological substrates that generate consciousness, not metaphorically. Neurologically, the machinery is there, and if the machinery is there, when your dog looks up at you with something you've always privately called recognition, the question isn't whether you're projecting. The question is whether you've been giving that moment enough credit. Dogs have been studied intensively precisely because the human-dog bond is so ancient and so layered. A 2016 study from Emory University using fMRI brain scans, actual brain imaging, of awake, unrestrained dogs found that the caudate nucleus, a region associated with anticipation of positive experiences, was significantly more active in response to the scent of a familiar human than to the scent of a familiar dog. Not stranger humans. Not strangers. Their person. The brain was responding specifically to the chemical signature of someone they knew, and, the data strongly suggests, someone they were glad to encounter. And here's where it gets quietly profound. A dog can't tell you it misses you. It can't send a message while you're away. But its brain, in your absence, is maintaining a representation of you, something that functions as your absence, that registers your presence when you return, and that responds to it with what the neuroscience describes as reward anticipation. Whether you call that love or not is a philosophical question. But the mechanism is real. The recognition is real. And it has a feeling attached to it. Now, close the loop on where we started, because the crow research has one final layer that tends to stay with people. In Marsluff's follow-up work, crows that had learned to associate the threatening mask with danger were observed years after the original experiment. Not weeks, years. The researchers who had worn those masks were greeted with alarm calls and diving behavior more than a decade after the initial encounter. This wasn't conditioning that faded. This was durable, emotional, personalized memory, the kind that in humans we would call a lasting impression. There's a moment in philosopher Thomas Nagel's 1974 essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, where he argues that the subjective experience of another creature is genuinely inaccessible to us, that no amount of external observation will ever fully close the gap between your mind and the mind behind those eyes. He's right. The gap is real. You will never fully know what a crow feels when it sees your face, or what a horse feels when it encounters someone whose photograph made it wary, or what a dog's brain is doing in the quiet hours while you're gone. But here's what the science gives you. Carefully, honestly, without sentimentality. The recognition is real. The memory is real. The emotional weight attached to that memory is neurologically real. And the relationship, the one you thought was mostly yours, the one you maybe worried you were inventing, it's mutual. It is genuinely, measurably, biologically mutual. That crow isn't just watching you. It knows your face. It has a feeling about it, and it will remember you long after you've forgotten it was ever there. If this moves something in you, and it should, the simplest thing you can do is like this video and share it with someone who has ever looked an animal in the eyes and wondered what was looking back. Because that question deserves more air in the world than it usually gets.